My pregnant wife stood in the driveway, holding her belly, smiling softly as she tried to start our car. Then Karen walked over. Red dress, angry face, HOA badge on her chest like she ruled the world. "Give me your keys," she yelled. "You parked in my spot again." My wife tried to stay calm. "Please, Karen, this isn't your spot, it's our driveway." But Karen didn't listen. She shouted louder, her face red with rage, then kicked my wife in the stomach. My wife fell to the ground, crying, holding her belly, begging for help. Neighbors froze. No one moved. Karen just stood there, breathing hard, proud of what she'd done. But she had no idea who she had just attacked. The woman she kicked was the wife of the police chief. Before you hear what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to follow for more real HOA stories where justice always wins. I still remember the scream, the sound that split the quiet morning air like glass breaking, the kind of sound that makes your body freeze before your mind can even think. The sun was bright that morning, spreading soft golden light over our street, the kind of light that should have meant peace, calm, safety. But instead, it was the start of something I will never forget. My pregnant wife stood in the driveway, her hands resting gently on her belly, the small silver car gleaming beside her. She was dressed in a light blue dress, her hair tied back, a soft smile on her face as she prepared to leave for her doctor's appointment. Everything was normal, quiet, perfect, until I heard the sharp click of heels from across the street, the kind of sound that meant trouble was walking toward us. Karen appeared, red dress blazing like a warning sign, sunglasses glinting, her mouth already twisted into that familiar look of anger she wore like armor. Her OA badge hung around her neck, the same badge she used to bully half the neighborhood. She walked fast, her heels striking the pavement like gunshots, and she pointed straight at my wife, her voice sharp and filled with rage. "Hey, that's my spot," she shouted, the sound cutting through the quiet air. "You've parked here again." My wife looked up, confused, her soft smile fading into shock. "Karen, this is our driveway," she said gently, her voice calm but tired. "We've lived here for 3 years, you know that," she tried to explain, to reason, the way kind people always do. But reasoning with Karen was like talking to a storm. You could shout all you wanted, it would never stop the lightning. Karen waved her HOA badge in the air, like a soldier showing off her weapon. "The rules say you can't park this close to the curb," she snapped. "Move the car or hand me the keys. Now." My wife's hands trembled, one resting protectively on her stomach. "Please," she said softly. "I'm pregnant. I'm going to the hospital. I can't." Before she could finish, Karen took another step forward, her face red, her voice rising like thunder. "I don't care," she yelled. "You think you can break the rules just because you're pregnant?" Then she moved fast, too fast, and kicked her. The sound of impact was awful, heavy, final. My wife gasped and fell to her knees, one hand still clutching her belly, the other hitting the rough pavement. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she tried to catch her breath, her voice breaking into a cry that made every neighbor turn their head. People came out of their houses, frozen on their porches, mouths open, eyes wide. No one moved. Karen stood over her, breathing heavily, her expression twisted with some kind of cruel satisfaction. "Next time, follow the rules," she muttered under her breath, turning away like she'd just won some kind of battle. The red fabric of her dress caught the sunlight again, making her look more like a threat than a person. My wife tried to push herself up, one hand reaching for the car, the other pressed to her stomach. "Please, help," she whispered, her voice so faint it almost disappeared in the breeze. A neighbor finally ran over, shouting for someone to call 911. The world spun into chaos, voices rising, feet rushing, phones dialing. But Karen? She just stood there, halfway across the driveway, staring at the ground as if nothing had happened. She didn't know, couldn't possibly know, who she had just hurt. The woman she kicked wasn't just any neighbor, any wife, she was my wife. And I wasn't just anyone either. I was the police chief, the man who spent years protecting others, now forced to watch his own world burn from the inside out. As the sirens started in the distance, my mind was already moving faster than my heartbeat. Anger, disbelief, fear, they all twisted together until I could barely tell which was which. I imagined her sitting there smugly, thinking she could use her HOA badge to control everyone, thinking the rules made her untouchable. But she had no idea what line she had just crossed, no idea what happens when you push a man who's built his life around justice. When I reached her later, when I saw her standing in the street like nothing had happened, I didn't even need to raise my voice. I just said her name, slow and sharp. Karen. She turned, and for the first time, I saw fear flash in her eyes. Maybe it was the way I said it. Maybe it was the look on my face. Maybe it was the fact that she could finally feel the weight of what she'd done. The neighbors who had watched in silence started to whisper now, some pointing, some shaking their heads, realizing what they had just witnessed. I looked back at my wife, lying in the back of the ambulance, her hand still over her belly, and something inside me hardened. I wasn't just going to arrest Karen. I was going to make sure she understood every second of what she'd done, every rule she had broken, not from a handbook, but from the law itself. She thought the HOA made her powerful. She thought a red dress and a clipboard gave her control. But what she didn't know was that the real power wasn't written in community guidelines. It was written in the eyes of a man who had just seen his pregnant wife kicked to the ground. That was the moment everything changed. The moment a petty HOA dispute became a crime. The moment Karen crossed from being a nuisance to becoming a criminal. And the moment I stopped being just the police chief of the neighborhood and became the man she would never forget. The moment my phone rang, I felt something wrong, deep in my gut, the kind of feeling that doesn't come from logic but instinct, the kind that whispers before your brain catches up, something's not right. I picked up the call, my name still half forming when I heard the voice on the other side, shaking, panicked, words coming fast between gasps. "Chief, it's your wife. She's on the ground. Someone attacked her. Please come quick." And that was it. That one sentence broke the world apart. I didn't even hang up properly, just dropped the phone, my chair scraping the floor as I bolted out of the office. My fellow officers shouted my name, asked what happened, but I couldn't answer, my mind already ahead of me, picturing my wife, picturing blood, her belly, her pain, her fear. My body moved before thought, my keys in my hand, the car engine roaring before the door even shut. The sirens screamed through the streets, lights flashing against buildings, people turning to look, not knowing that this time, it wasn't for them. It was for me. The drive felt both endless and instant. Every red light was an enemy. Every slow driver ahead of me was an obstacle. My knuckles turned white against the steering wheel, my jaw locked tight. I didn't care about speed limits. I didn't care about procedure. All I could think about was her, my Sarah, and the baby she carried. The baby we waited so long for. My heart pounded against my ribs like a drum of fear and fury mixed together, and I whispered to myself again and again, "Please, please be okay." When I turned the corner into our street, I saw the flashing lights of the ambulance already there, red and white cutting across the sunlight, bouncing off windows. I slammed the car into park before it even stopped rolling and ran. I didn't feel the gravel under my feet, didn't feel the air in my lungs. Didn't feel anything until I saw her. She was on the ground, surrounded by neighbors, some standing back, some crouched close, some just staring like statues. Her blue dress was torn at the shoulder, dirt smeared across her arms, her face pale, her hand holding her stomach. Her eyes opened when she heard me, her lips trembling as she tried to speak. "She kicked me," she whispered, her voice breaking, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Karen," said I parked wrong. That name hit me like a bullet. Karen. Of course it was her. The same woman who'd made everyone in the neighborhood miserable, the one who fined people for the color of their fences, who yelled about leaves on the sidewalk, who acted like she owned the entire street. But this time, she'd gone too far. I turned my head slowly and there she was, standing a few feet away, arms crossed, her red dress catching the light like it wanted attention, her expression smug, calm, proud even. My vision tunneled. Every sound faded except for the hum of rage in my ears. "You need to control your wife," Karen said coldly, her voice like ice. "She's breaking HOA rules." My heart nearly stopped. "Breaking rules?" I said, my voice low but shaking. "You assaulted a pregnant woman?" She rolled her eyes, a laugh in her throat. "Oh, please. I didn't mean to hurt her. She just wouldn't listen. You people think the rules don't apply to you. Maybe now she'll learn, you people. Those words, that tone, that arrogance. It took every ounce of discipline I'd built in my years of service to keep my hands at my sides. The crowd around us fell silent, the air thick with tension, waiting for what I'd do next. I wanted to shout, to let my anger loose, but I couldn't, not yet, not until I got Sarah safe. "Paramedics!" I shouted, my voice cracking through the air. "Now!" 2 medics rushed over, lifting Sarah carefully, securing her to the stretcher. She cried out in pain, and I leaned close, my hand on her shoulder. "I'm here," I said softly. "I'm not leaving you." As they lifted her into the ambulance, I turned back to Karen. She was watching, her chin tilted, that same mocking smirk still there. "You should really teach her to respect authority," she said, adjusting her sunglasses. "Authority?" I repeated, stepping closer, my shadow covering her. "You think your HOA badge makes you authority?" I leaned in, my voice low enough that only she could hear. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Her smirk faltered for a second, her confidence flickering like a candle in the wind. But then she straightened. "I'll talk to the board about this," she snapped, but I didn't answer. I turned and followed the ambulance. My wife came first, always. As I drove behind them, sirens wailing, I couldn't shake the image of her on the ground, the way she fell, the sound of her crying. Every second replayed, each detail sharper than the last. I thought about how Karen stood there, calm, like she'd done nothing wrong. Like she was proud. That was the part that twisted the knife deeper. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't scared. She was convinced she was right. At the hospital, I parked and ran inside, my badge flashing as I passed through the hall. Nurses pointed me toward the emergency room. Sarah was there, her hand on her belly, oxygen mask over her mouth, tears dried on her cheeks. I sat beside her, holding her hand, feeling her fingers weak in mine. "The baby," she whispered. "Is it?" "Shh," I said, my voice breaking. "We'll know soon. You're safe now." I looked at the doctor when he came in. His expression was grave but steady. "She's stable," he said, "but that was a close one. The stress, the fall, the trauma. She's lucky you got here so fast. The baby's heartbeat is steady, but she needs rest and no more shock." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Relief and rage collided inside me until it hurt to breathe. I thanked the doctor, turned to my wife, and kissed her forehead. "You're safe," I whispered again. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't enough. Safety didn't come from words. Safety came from action. Karen had crossed a line, one no one should ever cross, and now she would learn what it meant to go against a man who had spent his life defending justice. As the night grew darker outside the hospital window, I sat beside Sarah, watching her sleep, my mind already planning. I wasn't just going to file a report. I wasn't just going to press charges. I was going to make sure that woman never had power over anyone again. And this time, it wouldn't be the HOA that decided what was fair. It would be the law. My law. The hospital smelled like bleach and fear. That strange mix of cold air and sharp light that makes you feel both awake and trapped at the same time. Every sound louder than it should be. Every clock tick feeling like an hour passing. I sat beside Sarah's hospital bed, her hand still in mine, her skin pale and soft, her breathing shallow but steady. Machines beeped in quiet rhythm, a fragile reminder that she and the baby were still fighting. I watched the monitor, the green line rising and falling, steady, 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 and I told myself that as long as that line moved, everything could still be okay. But inside, there was a storm. My thoughts were heavy, running in circles, the same scene replaying over and over. Her scream, Karen's kick, the sound of her body hitting the ground, the neighbors staring, doing nothing, the red dress flashing like a warning flare in the sunlight. The doctor came in again, clipboard in hand, his voice calm but his eyes serious. "She's stable now," he said, pausing beside the bed, glancing at me. "Your wife's lucky. The fall could have caused internal injuries, but so far the baby's heartbeat is strong. We'll keep her overnight for observation." He spoke in that soft, professional tone that tried to make things sound less terrible than they were. I nodded, but I couldn't find words. My throat felt tight, my chest heavy. Sarah opened her eyes, weakly smiling at me through the oxygen mask. "We're okay," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Right?" I squeezed her hand gently. "You're safe now," I said, my words meant to comfort her. But inside I was boiling. Safe wasn't enough. Not when someone like Karen could just walk away after what she'd done. I stood up, pacing the room, every step filled with anger I was trying to hold in. Years of being a police officer, of staying calm in chaos, of dealing with criminals had trained me for almost everything. But not this. Not watching the woman I love lying in a hospital bed because of some power-obsessed neighbor. A nurse came in to check Sarah's vitals, adjusting wires and monitors, whispering soft reassurances before leaving us alone again. The silence settled heavy in the room. Outside the window, I could see the reflection of the city lights flickering against the glass. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. My fingers hovered over the screen before I finally called dispatch. "Chief Torres," I said, my voice steady now, but cold, precise, like the switch had flipped. "I need 2 officers sent to Meadow Ridge Avenue. Immediate arrest. Suspect, Karen Foster, female, mid-40s, red dress, charges, aggravated assault on a pregnant woman." The dispatcher hesitated. "Chief, is this personal?" I didn't blink. "It's justice." When I hung up, Sarah looked at me with tired eyes. "Michael," she said softly, "please, don't do something you'll regret." I leaned close, brushing her hair from her face. "The only thing I regret is not getting home sooner," I said quietly. "She could have killed you. Or the baby." My voice cracked then, but I pushed through it. "I have to do this." She nodded weakly, and I kissed her forehead before stepping out of the room. The hallway was empty except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint squeak of wheels down the corridor. My reflection followed me in the glass walls. A man in uniform, tired eyes, clenched fists. I'd seen what unchecked power could do, in criminals, in corrupt officials, and now, in a woman with an HOA badge who thought that made her untouchable. Outside, I stood in the cool night air, the city lights sharp against the dark sky. My phone buzzed again. One of my officers, Daniels, picked up the arrest order. "Chief, we're heading to the location now," he said. "You want us to bring her in quietly or make it official?" "Make it official," I said. She wanted attention. Let her have it. I could almost picture it. The red and blue lights flashing outside her perfect little house, the same way she'd used her rules and fines to shame everyone else. Except now, it would be her on the other side of it. I didn't go home right away. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, engine off, just listening to the quiet. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah falling, the way her hands reached out for balance that wasn't there, the way her voice cracked when she cried for help. My knuckles were still red from how hard I'd been gripping the steering wheel earlier. My pulse still hadn't slowed down. When my phone buzzed again, I already knew what it was before I answered. "Chief, we've got her," Daniels said. "Caught her at her house. She tried to say it was an accident. Neighbors are talking. She's in custody." I didn't respond right away. Just stared at the dashboard, the blinking clock. "Good," I said finally. "I'll come in tomorrow to file it personally." After hanging up, I walked back inside to see Sarah. She was asleep, her hand resting gently over her belly. I sat down beside her, watching her chest rise and fall, the steady rhythm that meant she was still here, still fighting. My anger softened into something heavier, grief mixed with exhaustion. I thought about all the times Karen had pushed people around, the small injustices everyone ignored because they seemed harmless. A fine here, a threat there, a public scolding about lawn colors or parking spaces. Everyone laughed it off because it was easier than standing up to her. But this wasn't small anymore. This was real harm, real pain, real consequence. I leaned forward, my voice low, speaking to the quiet room. "You messed with the wrong family, Karen," I whispered. "And this time, you're going to see what real authority looks like." Outside, the city kept moving, cars passing, lights flashing, life continuing as if nothing had happened. But for me, everything had changed. That night, I wasn't just a police chief. I was a husband, a protector, a man who had seen the line between law and justice blur into something personal. And by morning, I knew I wasn't done yet. That night, the air outside her house felt heavy, thick. carrying that kind of silence that hides under calmness before something breaks, the kind of silence soldiers know before a fight. I drove slowly down the narrow street, the headlights sliding across trimmed lawns and rows of perfect white fences that all looked the same, too perfect, too quiet. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my chest burned, every breath filled with a cold anger that didn't fade, not after the arrest, not after the hospital, not after I had watched my wife asleep with a bruise forming on her shoulder and fear still in her eyes. Karen's house sat near the end of the cul-de-sac, 2 stories, beige paint, spotless garden, the kind of place that screamed control. Her car, that same red sedan, sat in the driveway, polished, shining under the streetlight like nothing had happened, like it hadn't been parked in front of the scene she created earlier. I could see through the window, the living room glowing with warm light, a few people sitting around, voices low but confident, laughter cutting through the night. She was hosting a meeting, the HOA's little gathering, like the world hadn't already turned against her. I parked my car a few houses down, killed the engine and sat for a moment, letting the calm settle in my body. Every instinct I had told me to stay collected, to walk in with authority, to make her understand, not just as a police chief, but as a man whose family she had hurt. I got out, closed the door softly, and walked toward her house, my badge clipped on my belt, my boots heavy on the concrete. The closer I got, the clearer her voice became. I could hear her from outside the window, her tone sharp, self-assured, the kind that echoed in people's ears long after she stopped talking. "This neighborhood is falling apart," she was saying. "If we don't enforce rules, it'll be chaos. Some people think they're special. They think they can just ignore the HOA because they have titles or excuses." I stopped by the window, looked in, and saw her. Red dress again, neat hair, holding a clipboard like it was her weapon. The neighbors around her nodded nervously, the kind of nods people give when they're too afraid to disagree. She looked proud, confident, powerful, and that was the last time she would ever look that way. I walked up to the door and didn't bother to knock. The door handle turned under my hand, and I pushed it open. The laughter died instantly. Heads turned. Karen's smile froze mid-word. She blinked, her mouth half open, caught between arrogance and surprise. "Chief Torres," she said, her voice high and fake sweet. "You can't just barge into my home." I stepped inside, the room growing smaller, the air thickening. "Oh," I said calmly, my voice steady, my badge catching the light. "I can. And I just did." Her eyes widened, her face losing color. I didn't know. You didn't care." I cut her off, my tone low, sharp like the edge of a blade. "You didn't care who she was. You didn't care that she was pregnant. You didn't care that she was a human being. You cared about your rules, your ego, your fake power." She looked around, her confidence cracking, searching for someone to support her, but the neighbors sitting on her couch, the ones she'd bullied and fined, just stared at her, some with fear, others with disgust. I stepped closer, my boots echoing against her spotless floor, and she flinched slightly, that proud stance starting to crumble. "You think that HOA badge makes you powerful?" I said, pointing toward the lanyard still hanging around her neck. "You think it gives you the right to hurt people?" Her jaw tightened. "It was an accident," she said quickly, her tone changing, softer, trying to sound innocent. "I didn't mean to—" "You kicked a pregnant woman," I said, my voice rising just enough to fill the room. "You made her fall. You endangered her and her unborn child. That's not an accident, Karen. That's assault." The color drained from her face completely now. Her hands trembled as she set down the clipboard. I thought she was trespassing. She parked in violation of—" I laughed once, dry and bitter. "Violation? You want to talk about violations?" I pulled a folded paper from my pocket. "The HOA regulations she loved to wave at everyone. You hide behind rules to justify your cruelty. You fine people for flowers, for trash cans, for paint colors. You think fear keeps a community together?" I tossed the paper on the table in front of her. "You don't build a neighborhood, Karen. You destroy it." Behind me, I heard the front door open. 2 officers stepped inside, their radios crackling softly. The silence in the room deepened, heavy, electric. Karen looked from them to me, her eyes wide now, desperate. "Wait," she said quickly, her voice shaking. "You can't do this. You don't have the authority." I took one step closer until we were face to face. Authority? I said quietly. You're talking to the police chief. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The officers moved forward, one pulling out the cuffs, the other reading her rights. The click of metal was loud, sharp, final. This is insane, she shouted, twisting, her red dress catching the light as she struggled. You can't arrest me. I'm the president of the HOA. I have rights. I watched her, expression flat, voice cold. You had authority, I said, and you abused it. You had power, and you used it to hurt people. Now you're learning what real law looks like. The neighbors whispered among themselves, some stepping back, some staring in disbelief as the officers led her toward the door. She fought, of course, still shouting, still trying to turn it around. This isn't over, she screamed. You'll regret this. I followed her out onto the porch, stopping just at the door. No, Karen, I said quietly, the anger in my voice gone, replaced by something far heavier. The only one who's going to regret anything is you. The door shut behind her, the sound echoing through her perfect little living room. The neighbors stayed frozen for a moment, then began to move, whispering, finally free from the shadow she'd cast over them for years. I looked around, at the photos on her wall, the organized chaos of her rules and documents, and I realized something. People like her never saw the damage they caused until it came for them. Outside, the red and blue lights flickered across the glass, flashing against the walls like the final act of judgment. I stood there for a long time, breathing slowly, letting the anger drain out of me. It wasn't satisfaction, not really. It was something colder, emptier. The quiet knowledge that justice had finally done what kindness couldn't. And as I walked out into the night, past the flashing lights and the murmurs of relieved neighbors, I thought of Sarah, safe in her hospital bed, and the baby, still fighting. I thought about the promise I made to protect them, and for the first time in days, I felt like I had kept it. Morning light crept through the blinds, soft and slow, cutting lines across the hospital floor, the world feeling heavy and still, the air thick with that calm that comes after chaos, but before peace. Like the storm had passed, but the clouds still refused to move away. I sat in the same chair I had been in all night, my eyes burning from no sleep, my hands still wrapped around Sarah's, her fingers warm now, her breathing steady, her heartbeat and the baby's soft rhythm echoing on the monitor beside her. She was awake, tired but alive, her face pale but calm, a quiet strength in her eyes that always grounded me when the world felt like it was spinning apart. Did they arrest her? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded slowly, squeezing her hand, feeling that mixture of relief and anger that never really settled. Yes, I said softly. She's gone. Sarah closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek, not from pain, but from the release of everything she'd been holding in. I brushed it away, leaned close, and whispered, "She won't hurt anyone else." She nodded weakly, then turned her head slightly, her voice trembling. I was so scared, Michael. I thought we'd lose the baby. I pressed my forehead against hers, breathing her in, the faint smell of antiseptic, and her shampoo mixing into something that reminded me of home. You didn't, I said quietly. You fought. You're both stronger than you know. Later that morning, a nurse came in to check her vitals, smiling softly, the kind of tired, kind smile of someone who had seen too much pain in one place. You're lucky, she said gently, adjusting the fourth. Not many people come out of something like that without worse injuries. You must have someone watching over you. Sarah smiled faintly and looked at me. I do, she said, her hand finding mine again. I didn't say anything, just nodded, because I couldn't speak without my voice cracking. Outside the hospital, life continued like nothing happened. Cars passed, people laughed, the world moved forward. But in our neighborhood, it didn't. By afternoon, the story had spread. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, not out of justice but out of fear. They wanted distance from Karen's name, her actions, her mess. People who once followed her blindly were now pretending they never agreed with her, their voices shaky, their excuses rehearsed. I got the call just before sunset. Chief Torres, said the HOA vice president, a man named Harold, who used to defend Karen in every argument. We voted to remove her from the board permanently. We also wanted to apologize, sir. We didn't realize how bad things had gotten. I listened, silent for a long moment, staring out the hospital window at the fading light. You realized, I said finally, my voice steady but low. You just didn't care until it was too late. There was silence on the other end. We're sorry, he said again. I hung up without replying. Some apologies come only when they cost nothing. When we got home later that evening, the neighborhood was quiet. No barking dogs, no shouting, no HOA warnings taped to mailboxes. Karen's house was dark, her car gone, the windows closed tight. People watched from their porches as we pulled into our driveway, nodding awkwardly, unsure whether to approach or stay silent. A few came forward with flowers, cards, stammered apologies. One older woman said softly, "We were all scared of her." I looked at her and said, "You shouldn't have been." Inside, I helped Sarah to the couch. She lowered herself slowly, her hand on her belly, smiling faintly when the baby kicked. "Feels like it's telling me everything's okay," she whispered. I smiled, sitting beside her, the warmth of home wrapping around us again. For the first time in days, the silence felt safe. Later, I walked outside, down the driveway, and stood under the porch light, the cool air brushing against my face. The neighborhood felt different, lighter somehow. No HOA patrol car circling, no Karen's voice echoing through the cul-de-sac, just peace. I thought about everything she'd done, the years she spent turning good people into fearful ones, and how easily they all let it happen. Power doesn't need a gun to hurt people. Sometimes it just hides behind a clipboard and a fake smile. My phone buzzed again, an update from the station. "She's being processed," the message read. "No bail until the hearing." I stared at the screen for a long time, the words settling like a final breath at the end of a long, brutal day. I texted back, "Good, file everything by morning." As the stars began to appear, I turned back toward the house. Through the window, I could see Sarah sitting quietly, one hand over her belly, the other brushing her hair away from her face. She looked tired but peaceful, safe. That was all I ever wanted. I stepped inside, locked the door, and turned off the porch light. The house was dark except for the faint glow of the lamp by the couch. I sat beside her again, my arm around her shoulders, her head resting against me. For a while, neither of us said a word. The silence didn't need filling. Finally, she whispered, "What happens now?" I looked down at her, then at her belly, then back toward the darkened window where Karen's house used to glow every night like a warning light. "Now," I said slowly, "we move on. We live without fear." She smiled faintly, her eyes closing. "And her?" I hesitated, then spoke quietly, each word heavy. "She'll answer for what she's done. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but she will." Outside, the night settled deeper, the air still and calm. Somewhere far away, a dog barked, a car engine hummed, life went on. But for me, sitting there with the woman I loved, holding on to what mattered most, I knew one thing for sure. Some battles aren't fought on fields or with weapons. Some are fought at home, quietly, fiercely, in the name of the people you love. And no matter how strong the enemy looks, no matter how untouchable they seem, justice always finds its way. Because men like me never stop until it does. The morning of the trial came quiet, pale sunlight spilling through the blinds, the kind that doesn't feel warm yet but tells you the world is still moving, still turning, still alive even after everything. I stood in front of the mirror in my uniform, my badge shining against the fabric, my hands steady but my heart beating slow, deep, controlled, the same way it did before a mission. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her belly round beneath her dress, her face calm but her eyes thoughtful. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then softly she asked, "Do you think she'll say sorry?" I looked at her reflection in the mirror, shaking my head. "People like her," I said quietly. "They don't say sorry. They just regret getting caught." We drove to the courthouse together, the city waking up around us, traffic lights blinking from red to green, people walking dogs, cars honking in the distance, life returning to normal, though for us, normal didn't exist anymore. When we arrived, the crowd outside was small, mostly reporters, a few curious locals, and some HOA members pretending to be concerned. I guided Sarah through the doors, my hand steady on her back, the security guard nodding as we passed. Inside, the air was cold, sterile, filled with the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Karen sat at the defendant's table, her red dress replaced by a plain gray suit, her hair pulled back tightly, her confidence gone but her eyes still sharp, still searching for control. When she saw me, her lips twitched, like she wanted to say something but thought better of it. Her lawyer whispered in her ear, shuffling papers, pretending not to notice the tension that filled the room like static. The judge entered, the courtroom rising, the gavel echoing like a heartbeat against the wooden walls. The charges were read: aggravated assault, endangerment, violation of HOA authority, misuse of emergency powers. Each word felt like a nail sealing her fate. The witnesses came forward one by one. My wife, still trembling slightly, the neighbor who had seen everything, the paramedics who arrived that night. Their voices wove the story together piece by piece, calm but heavy, truth layered over fear, each detail cutting deeper into Karen's mask of arrogance. When it was my turn, I stood straight, every step deliberate, every breath steady. The prosecutor asked me to describe what I saw that day, what I felt. I told them everything: how I got the call, how I found Sarah in the street, how Karen had stood there, arms crossed, smirking like she was proud. I told them about the baby, the fear, the helplessness that turned into fury. The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was enough. Karen's lawyer tried to twist it, calling it a misunderstanding, saying she lost her balance, that she didn't mean to cause harm. But the evidence was too clear, the witnesses too strong, the truth too sharp to bend. When Sarah lifted her sleeve to show the bruises, the air in the room shifted, heavy and electric. Karen looked down, her hands gripping the table, her jaw tight, her face pale. When the judge finally spoke, the words were short, firm, final. "Karen Foster," he said, his voice steady, "you are hereby sentenced to 3 years in state custody, with mandatory counseling and community restitution." The gavel struck once, the sound ringing out like thunder, like closure, like justice. Karen broke then, not out of remorse, but fear. Her voice cracked, her mask slipping. "You can't do this," she shouted, her hands trembling. "I was protecting the neighborhood. I was following the rules, but no one listened." The bailiff stepped forward, the cuffs clicked shut around her wrists, and just like that, the power she clung to for years vanished in a moment. Afterward, Sarah and I stepped outside into the sunlight. The reporters called out, cameras flashing, microphones reaching toward us, questions spilling like rain. I said nothing. Sarah held my hand tighter, and we walked through them, our heads high, our hearts still heavy but light enough to breathe again. That evening, the neighborhood was different. Children played in the yards again, their laughter echoing where fear used to live. The air smelled of barbecue and freshly cut grass. Someone down the street waved at us. It was small, simple, but it meant everything. Karen's house was dark now, a for sale sign hammered into the lawn, the letters clean and bright under the fading light. A few days later, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Sarah and I sat on the porch together. She leaned her head on my shoulder, her hand resting on her belly, the baby kicking softly beneath her palm. "Do you think the baby will ever know?" she asked quietly. I smiled, brushing my thumb over her hand. "One day," I said, "and when she does, she'll know her mother was brave, and that her father never let fear win." The air was calm, the cicadas humming softly in the trees, the world finally at peace again. I looked across the street where Karen's house stood empty, its windows reflecting the last glow of sunset. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, not because she was gone, but because she'd never understood what power really meant. It wasn't control, or fear, or rules. It was love, and the will to protect it. When the porch light flickered on, Sarah smiled. "You know," she said softly, "you're not just a cop tonight. You're my hero." I laughed quietly, shaking my head. "I'm just a husband," I said, "doing what any man should do." But as I looked out over our street, peaceful, bright, alive again, I knew it was more than that. It was a promise kept, a life rebuilt, a reminder that some wars aren't fought on battlefields but in backyards, against people who forget what kindness means. And as the stars appeared one by one, I held her hand tighter, whispering to the quiet night, "It's over now. We're safe. We're home." The wind stirred the trees, the air carrying that scent of new beginnings, clean and soft. Somewhere far away, a siren echoed faintly, fading into the distance. Another call, another fight for someone else. But not tonight. Tonight, the world could wait. Tonight, we had peace.